Hello, you're very welcome to this Stop Climate Chaos webinar recording of our recent webinar, Good Cop, Bad Cop, Lessons from Glasgow. We didn't record the very beginning of this webinar where our panel of speakers were introduced, so I'm going to quickly run through them now before transferring you to the recording of the webinar itself. So the first speaker you'll hear from is Siobhan Curran of Trócaire. Siobhan will be followed by Jayne Geraghty of Friends of the Earth, and you'll also hear from Marion Briggs, also of Friends of the Earth. Our other panellists are Valery Molay of the National Youth Council of Ireland, Aideen of Not Here, Not Anywhere, activist Anya Gorman, formerly of Stop Climate Chaos, and youth activist Amy OBrien. And the webinar is being chaired by Oisín Coughlin. And we're going to launch right in now to hearing from Siobhan Curran of Trócaire as she shares some of her overall reflections on how COP26 went and what came out of it.
Yeah, overall, I mean, again, not surprising, but just at times the lack of solidarity shown with poorer countries. You know, sometimes the way climate financing was being pitched as a donor issue, when in fact, you know, there is a historical responsibility that richer countries have, and it's a matter of social justice, and it should be a matter of solidarity and paying our due rather than, you know, that kind of donor approach. And it was disappointing as well with climate financing, although there was kind of a, you know, I suppose countries are now being urged to meet their $100 billion a year climate financing commitments, which it's estimated by 2023 they'll meet that. But the ambition to have 600 million from now to 2025 or billion wasn't reached. So I think some disappointment there, and I think we'll really have to keep pushing on the climate justice side of things. And I suppose top takeaway, I mean, yeah, maybe like the work continues, and you know, it's a bit, nothing is going to happen on COP without a lot of work beforehand, you know. So I think from now to then, I mean, it's really positive to see that states are being urged to update their NDCs next year. So I think a lot of work and advocacy in that direction is needed. I think we can really push on the different work streams between now and COP on loss and damage and climate financing. And I think the other top takeaway is just joining the dots. Corporate accountability just came out so starkly for me at COP, and the reality that if corporations are not being held to account in relation to climate, the environment and human rights, we're really going to be challenged in dealing with climate change. But also as the transition happens and the demand for minerals, the demand for land, if we're not regulating corporations, there's going to be serious environmental and human rights abuses. Yes. So I'll stop there. Sorry, I've probably abused the time. It's hard to squish it all in, but I'll stop.
Thank you, Siobhan. And I'm going to keep on going to my colleague Jayne Geraghty.
So why was I in Glasgow? Well, just speaking about Amy. So for a couple of different reasons, but definitely supporting youth activism and encouraging a connection, you know, between the local struggles happening here in Ireland and international global justice struggles happening all around the world. And that movement building element is why I was in Glasgow. I went with one of our youth activist leaders, Amy OBrien, who hopefully you'll hear a little from this evening. And we went and we joined with Friends of the Earth International and other delegates as part of their mobilisation efforts. We supported and joined with other young activists as well, coming from Young Friends of the Earth Europe as part of a system reset project, which is really coming to a close, but it was a project, a European-wide project that we've been working on to tackle and identify underrepresented youth voices around Europe who haven't really been given a platform and engaged for many different social justice reasons as part of the climate justice movement. And so that was a key reason why we were there, was to bring all of the work that had been done as part of that project to the fore and put an international spotlight on it. Some of the lowlights that I experienced at COP have already been mentioned. Looking at our global leaders, coming from rich countries who continue to refuse to do their fair share of what's actually needed historically, turning their backs on the poorest of those in the world who are living in poverty, who are additionally being faced with an ongoing public health crisis of COVID-19, you know, placing an emphasis on an increasing divide with inequalities and looking at climate apartheid. And, you know, we saw that with the vaccines, and many of our comrades and colleagues from around the world who were unable to attend COP26 for this reason. We also saw so many, you know, devastation around the climate impacts and the loss and damage finance facility, which was being blocked by rich countries like the US, UK, as well as the EU. And this was really devastating to see. And it's something that really was a heartbreak to many of the activists on the ground. We also were just shocked at greenwashing and the false solutions. We joined a toxic tour organized by local activists in Glasgow, trying to kick polluters out of the COP, that corporate accountability that Siobhan was already mentioning. And really, we saw this, it was really prevalent. It always is every COP, but particularly so this year as well. You know, we really were not seeing the kind of real emission reductions that we wanted. We were seeing kind of hollow, you know, false solutions such as like the net zero pledges, which I'm sure many of you will hear more about later on tonight. So we, you know, wanted to try to find opportunities for hope, for building community, for movement building. Oh, sorry, Oisin, am I over time?
No, 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. The biggest highlight that I can say was actually the mobilization efforts that we took part in on the streets of Glasgow. I think one of the major differences that I can say from this COP, from previous COPs that I've been at, was just the cross movement building that was taking place. I think there was a huge emphasis on relationship building and intersectional movement building. And I think that this was really evident on the streets. So it was a real disparity between what was happening on the streets of Glasgow and what was happening in behind, you know, the negotiations with global leaders. So for us, it was looking at young people finding alternative spaces, their school, the strike on the Friday, looking at the Global Day of Action, and so many people all around the world who were taking action in solidarity. And I think, if anything, in terms of next steps of what we need, you know, it's really to draw from that hope, to continue to build that, the need to not just take for granted what's happening inside these negotiating spaces as being gospel. This is not, we're not going to find all the answers in there. It's not going to come between, you know, the commas and the brackets in the COP text. It's also got to be about people making changes, changing our attitudes, behaviors, and not standing by and letting global leaders go and continue to make false solutions, false promises. What we really need is ambitious climate action that is rooted in system change.
Thanks, Imogen. And I'm going to keep going. And the next person up is John Sweeney from Maynooth University, who's this was not John's first COP, to put it mildly.
No, and I've become quite used to the fact that there's often a big dichotomy between what the world leaders say in terms of noble aspirations in the first few days and what eventually transpires as more disappointment, really, in the last few days when the negotiators get to work. And this COP was following those kinds of lines as well. The organisation of the whole operation had its hiccups, especially at the beginning in terms of admittance, in terms of queuing, but to some extent the United Nations got over that. They were responsible for everything within the building, and I think they did eventually solve a lot of those problems. But it is true that there was a lot of petty bureaucracy at work in terms of inhibiting people to go into meetings from party overflow tickets. The Irish government did issue a number of party tickets beyond those who are employed in the departments and the public service specifically. And this was to some extent done selectively, but I would have liked to have seen more in the way of, I suppose, a willingness to allow us to get into some of those meetings in the interest of transparency. I think the highlight for me was, I think, the way in which there was more transparency from the from the government here in terms of its policies. They weren't sheltering behind other countries, as I've noted in previous COPs, and this was very welcome indeed. It enabled us to be progressive in areas, especially along the Power Past Coal coalition, especially in areas of beyond oil and gas, where good steps were taken and the Irish government was involved. I think also the highlight was the final resolution of the Paris Rule Book, so we can move on from that now in the next few years to actually look at the implementation of Paris. The low light, I suppose, was the last couple of days in particular, the way in which kind of expectations that had been built up were rudely dashed by the two big countries, India and China. The other aspects that I think, well, the other highlight was the way in which 1.5 degrees became the de facto target rather than 2 degrees. I didn't hear much mention of 2 degrees in Glasgow, and I think I'm quite pleased to see that 1.5 is now the default in many areas of negotiation. And it's something we should push quite hard for in the next year, I think, as well. The other objective which Trócaire had in going was to forge stronger links with the International National Trusts Organization, and we had some very productive meetings with them. It was also to, I suppose, engage with other NGOs which we had less successful relations with, in particular WWF. And we wanted to disabuse them of getting involved in Irish policy in the way that they had in recent months in the Irish Farmers Journal, for example. And that was something that we hopefully will develop further in the years ahead. We were also keen on getting involved in the peatlands issue, which was quite a productive issue as well.
1 minute, John.
In Scotland as well. So I suppose, you know, the top takeaway for me would be the way in which adaptation funds have been doubled, the way in which countries are now willing, I think, to move towards that 100 billion more quickly and to extend it to 500 billion within the next 5 or 6 years. If that happens, then we have some hope, I think. The other aspect that I think was important was the methane agreement, and I think that's something that we should be pushing nationally here. I thought it was very hypocritical for the Taoiseach to sign a methane agreement for 30% reduction and then almost immediately afterwards say it doesn't apply to us, it's somebody else that's going to carry the can. And I think that's something we should hold the government's feet to the fire on in the next few months. But those were my main takeaways. I've run out of time, so I'll pass on to the rest.
Thank you, John. And I am going next to Valery from NYCI.
Hi everyone, my name is Valery and I'm with the National Youth Council of Ireland. So our main work as such, or idea going to COP was related to climate justice, because that's the aspect of environment that we care so much about. So it's mainly about climate justice, making sure that we are upholding the principles of climate justice in how we are coming up with solutions for climate change, but also youth participation and making sure that youth engagement is actually done in a meaningful way to actually bring about the change that young people want to see. So needless to say, in terms of upholding that idea of climate justice, it's very hard because for me anyway, or from the perspective that climate justice means, recognizes that climate change is not just a environmental issue, it's a systemic problem that is basically based on the fact that we have a failed system. So to walk around COP and specifically inside, because I had the privilege of being both inside and outside, and to walk around inside and not have had any moment where I felt where the conversation were actually talking about actions and solution beyond the system to which we know. So for me, some examples of of it is when we get China and India changing the language at the end to down for cold instead of phasing out. For me, that's a result of the fact that we're still trying to build a solution within the current system. Because, well, in the current system, if we're still thinking about economic growth, and we're still thinking about the global south producing for the global north, well, it makes sense that China and India will not want phase that out of coal. They will want phase down so they can continue doing business as usual. So for me, these were sort of some of the highlight in terms of some of the things that ticked with me, is that yes, I even said in one of the meetings, challenging Franz Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Union, and it was like, if it looks to me that even if by miracle we were able to respond to greenhouse gas emission with COP, the world will come back again with another crisis on the table. And because we're not really thinking through about solution beyond the system to which we know. So to respond to that last question, and of course, I can talk about the youth engagement in that same sense. It was great that this year that we got much more, not visibility, but time to speak to negotiators and to speak to like politicians about the position that young people had in mind and things like that. We had spaces, but once again, the question is, where does it go? So I can still talk about that. That was also one of it was better, but we're not there yet. But to conclude, basically, and I think I want to conclude in that idea of like, what should we do here at home to prepare for the sort of result that we want to see at COP? Well, I would say that the environmental movement has to start thinking also of pushing the agenda beyond just solving the greenhouse gas emission, that we have to start aligning those core principles of climate justice to the core in the sort of solution that we're pushing forward. Otherwise, we're still going to see the same thing happening, and we will complain all the time about, well, why are we seeing increase in adaptation, but it sounds like charity? Well, it sounds like charity because we're still in a specific model and stuff. So love to talk more about this, but this is my 2 cents, sorry.
Thanks, Valerie. There will be more time in the breakout groups for everyone to talk and share. I'm going next to Marion. And so introduce who you are and answer the questions.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. So my name is Marion Briggs. I am the chair of the board of directors of Friends of the Earth. This was my 3rd COP. So in the previous years, I've gone to COP and I've really followed a particular track. I've been really interested in finance and corporate and institutional finance in particular. So I had kind of chased those tracks previously. This year, I really went as a generalist. So, it has its pros and cons. I feel like I never got really deep into one subject, but kind of had a broad overview of what was happening in different areas. Like Sive, having gone to a couple of COPs, it's an amazing event to attend, and I'll definitely continue to go. The highlight for me, I drove to the COP and I brought my teenage children with me, and bringing them to the marches was just absolutely fantastic. It was really great to help them see that there are so many people that care about this issue, and from different industries, backgrounds, persuasions, different cultures, all coming together for the same reason. And I think that is actually one of the most amazing and inspiring parts of the COP, is that it's really a 2 conferences at once, right? It's partly this high level climate negotiation, but then on the outside, out on the streets and in the green zone and other areas, there's really like the Woodstock of climate. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the mix of things that are happening, and the energy that's out there is really inspiring. And I thought that was really a highlight for me. And also just seeing how huge it was this year. It was much larger than the previous years that I had been to. So that I found very inspiring, that so many people really cared. And you could take a cynical approach and say, well, there was lots of people there to, give their message and make their announcement. But I actually think that a lot of those people actually were there because they really do care, really do want to make a difference. The other highlight for me was the People's Plenary. So on the last day, one of the big plenary rooms was handed over to civil society, and there was an amazing hour-long set of speeches from Indigenous communities, from youth, from the disabled, and it was really inspiring to hear inside the venue. So I think that was another highlight for me. The disappointment, as John Sweeney mentioned, the watered down text, even though I know better from experience that it's always going to be a compromise and these events are always just going to be a snapshot of the moment. I don't know, I was still holding out hope. I got caught up in that, keep 1.5 alive. And, it was exciting that fossil fuels even made it into the text. So I have to say, I was very disappointed when India came in at the last minute and when the text was weakened. But for me, the other disappointment was the tone of some of the leadership. And in particular from the US and the UK, I found the tone of let's all solve this together quite tone deaf and quite hard to take. I felt like some of the global north would be much more suited to a little bit more, just a bit more apology, a bit more humility would suit them a lot better. I found that tone sometimes hard to take because they're not going to solve this and they're not cheerleading their way out of it. And I almost found that offensive at times. So for me, the top takeaway was really, again, that, this is a snapshot. It's not the be all and end all as it was sometimes billed. And I think that, what we have to do next is really mobilize everybody to make changes across all sectors. And somehow we need to frame the conversation so that these changes are seen as positive and not detrimental, because we get so much resistance from so many quarters. So, for me, I believe fundamentally that our crises stem from this break and separation from nature, and that in order to heal ourselves and our planet and find justice, we have to put life and the regeneration of life at the heart of every decision that we make. So, learning to ask ourselves if our activities are supporting more life and creating more life and enhancing it, or are they extractive, are they detrimental, and are they diminishing life, is really central to creating justice and solving a lot of these issues. And then also, obviously, we need to, and then also we need to hold our governments and corporations to account and, to the standards that they've now set for themselves. It's great that they've talked and said that there's, here's all the things that they want to accomplish, but now it's up to us, the people, to try and track that and hold them to account. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion, and sorry for being such a firm on time. I'm going to keep going to Amy O'Brien. So can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself and talk about your experience in Glasgow?
Perfect. Hi, I'm Amy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a youth activist. And kind of what I was doing in Glasgow. So I went with Emma Jayne from Friends of the Earth and travelled over, and we were like part of outside activities. So I think the main focus around all of that for me was kind of pressuring governments, but also holding corporations accountable, and to show that our eyes are on them, and calling out the hypocrisy and greenwashing that was surrounding COP, including, like, if you look at even the UK government, who were actually hosting COP, calling themselves climate leaders because of hosting this, really exclusive conference, but then actually being set to approve a new oil and gas field very, very soon, that they've yet to come out across. It is hypocrisy and it is greenwashing, and unless we're there to, call it out, then nobody else will. So I think that was a really big focus with the outside actions this year. And I think my biggest highlight was definitely just meeting other activists and other people and listening to everyone, but especially those who have been most impacted by climate change already. And it was incredible to see not as many as there should have been, but to see a lot of Indigenous leaders as well, and to be able to spend time listening to them in the flesh as well. And I think being with those people was such a highlight, because I think I was able to find hope in that, like, community, and within these people there was so much imagination for a better world, and I think actually worlds, because I think everyone had such different kind of views of the better world that we could create, and I think that there was so much inspiration and hope in that, that we don't have to give up. And as Valerie was saying, we need to kind of we need to be creative. We need to think of outside of what's been handed to us. And I think in terms of what was the most kind of depressing thing that came out of it was the kind of silence that just so many forces try to put on our voices, including hearing again about environmental defenders and the death and violence that they've had to endure in, again, the front lines, MAPA, most affected people in areas, how dangerous it is for them to be activists, and also just the high police presence. But I think that also, even though it was very like upsetting to see, I think it was also really empowered me and my voice, and just reminded me that we have to keep acting, because so many people don't want us to. And I think in terms of my takeaway and what to do next, I'm actually thinking more about emotions, because I think like there's always this thread of despair and anger and sadness, but really I've just been reminded of the hope and the joy that we deserve to feel and that we can feel when we're working together. And I think coming home reminded me of how much work there is to be done, because we don't feel that all the time when we're at home. And I think my biggest takeaway that to take home and what to do next is that we cannot compromise on the science, and we can't settle while millions of lives are at stake at the same time that another world is possible. So that's my biggest takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for staying on time so amazingly well. And I'm going to keep going and hand over to Aideen from Not Hearing It Anywhere.
Hi everyone. God, Anya, I actually feel really energized after your speech. That was really good. Yeah, it makes me feel much better about COP. Yeah, so I'm Aideen. I am a member of a volunteer activist group called Not Here, Not Anywhere, and we work on stopping fossil fuel exploration and infrastructure. And I was there in COP with there was a few more people from Not Here, Not Anywhere there as well. And I was also there looking at, keeping an eye on what was going on with the sort of the corporate sector at COP, because I'm an academic in DCU in the business school, and I work on sustainability and climate. So I was looking at COP through both of those lenses. And I guess, so highlights, first of all, from a Not Here, Not Anywhere perspective, it was great that Ireland joined this new Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is an alliance of, I think there are 12 countries who have agreed to stop fossil fuel production by a date as yet to be announced. So that was great. It doesn't actually commit the countries involved to anything in a legal sense, but it does kind of put Ireland in a group of countries who are really committed to phasing out fossil fuels, not just phasing down, as was in the COP text. So that was really good. I also saw from the sort of corporate side, I was surprised that there was kind of a lot of space even within the blue zone and inside the COP for people calling out greenwashing and issues with carbon offsets and net zero. There were actually lots of NGOs and other organizations that were, producing reports that sort of that were sort of critical of companies at COP and companies' involvement in climate. So that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting to see. And then on the negative side, it's actually it relates to that corporate presence as well. I was hearing a lot of the countries are using a lot of the language that companies have been using for years around climate action. So I actually, I'd hear people on the main stage saying, this is an opportunity, this is the greatest commercial opportunity we've ever had. And I mean, I find that just appalling, because people are dying. This isn't your business opportunity. And now you have country, the UK and the US, they're very much using that language. And companies aren't just permeating the discourse. They have this huge presence, not even you had Sky sponsoring things and Scottish Power and that, but just in terms of like the speakers, you had Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, or maybe not Mark Zuckerberg, but Facebook were definitely there. And that's really kind of, it's hard to see the line where, where does government kind of government driving things and corporations driving things? Where are the lines there? So that's a little bit concerning. And then in terms of what we can do, so I guess I always sound like a broken record with this, but we need to ban new fossil fuel infrastructure, particularly LNG terminals in Ireland. We're part of that. We're part of that BOGA Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance now. So we really need to. And the Irish government has done lots on this. It's it is really leading on this. But we do have an immediate threat of a massive LNG terminal and data centres complex in Kerry. Shannon LNG planning permission, or the planning application, is there now, and hopefully it won't go through, but we really do need some legislation to make sure that doesn't go through. And then I guess on that kind of corporate lens, we kind of, and a few other people have touched on this in terms of the accountability. So where does the responsibility of governments versus corporations, where does that start and stop, and what are the links there? And I think we haven't really, I'm an accountant, so of course I'm going to think this, and I work in sustainability accounting. So we haven't really joined the dots between who's responsible for these emissions, where is the transparency in terms of reporting at that kind of national country level, and there are some new in the finalizing of the Paris Agreement that people were talking about. There are some new kind of rules. Oh yeah, perfect. I'm done. Around transparency, and it's just joining the dots between national and corporate accountability.
Thanks, Aideen. And finally, but last but not least, Anya Gorman, who until summer would have been running this webinar better than me. Anya, why were you in Glasgow and what were you up to?
Hey everyone. So I was in Glasgow just to kind of meet people and be there. I've been talking a lot at people, I guess, for the last year or so, and it was good to go and listen. So I was not in the blue zone. I didn't have a badge. I was just there to attend the movement spaces and meet activists and stuff. So that was basically what I was doing. In relation to the kind of questions we've been asked, I guess my highlight around COP was really looking at the activists on the ground who were not just doing during COP when you really could just be doing climate stuff. We're going and like attending the protests that the bin collectors were putting on, attending the protests that the train drivers were putting on, going to protests at the Home Office, which is the immigration office, which is because as Jayne spoke about before, there was huge issues with activists coming from the global south. And I think that was really, really, really powerful. And that's something that in like our learnings and what we need to be going forward and doing is something that we really, really, really need to start thinking about properly and doing properly, is active solidarity. Going out, if we're asking people to get on board with climate policy, if we're asking people to start, and it is affecting everyone, we really need to start going out to other people's events. And I guess that also links in what Valery was saying around, the system that we're trying to change rather than just the emissions. So that was really, really great to see. I guess the low light. So what I was doing was I was going there was a coalition of grassroots groups, unions, NGOs, activists who were putting on events during COP, outside the COP, for people of Glasgow, for people like myself who were coming who didn't have a badge. And one of the things they were doing was they were trying to give space to voices who weren't going to be heard properly in the COP. So there was a lot of activists from the global south, a lot of Indigenous people, as well as activists from the global north. And I guess one of the key messages that came out was this narrative around net zero and false solutions. And really what everyone was saying was net zero is not enough. Net zero allows us, it's a delay tactic. It allows companies to say, oh, but we're doing something, when in fact what they're doing is they're relying on future technology that we don't necessarily have. And this is the same for governments as well. But I guess more than just the future technology that we don't already have, what they were really talking about was nature-based solutions and carbon offsetting. And one of the biggest facts that we were given across many of these events that I went to was, if you look at just the fossil fuel companies, fossil fuel companies have pledged to carbon offset with nature-based solutions with planting trees, a landmass more than the size of Australia. Now, for the love of God, where the hell are we going to plant all these trees? And the big question that Indigenous activists were having, people specifically, especially from Africa and Southeast Asia and South America, were saying as well is, where are you going to plant these trees? And, you know, governments are talking about tree planting as well for offsetting. Where are you going to plant these trees? You know, Survival International have said this could be the biggest land grab in history, of going in and saying, well, Indigenous people, you're not looking after that land properly. We've been burning fossil fuels over here, and we need to plant 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 trees on your land. And I think from looking at what the movement needs to talk about now, we really, really need to start talking about net zero. And we really need to start talking about our place. You know, we've been a colonized country in Ireland, but our place in the neo-colonialism of the planet, when we think about these offsets, this tree planting, these nature-based solutions, and really, you know, where is our role? And are we going to stand up and say, you know, we don't want to sacrifice people, we don't want to sacrifice areas of the earth. What we need to be doing is cutting the fossil fuels, not these like future airy-fairy carbon offset mechanism. I think there's a Friends of the Earth International report that calls them carbon unicorns, because they don't really exist. So I think that's the two things that we need to grapple with are, you know, where are we going to sit? What are we going to do about this net zero thing, these carbon offsets, these nature-based solutions? We need to start talking about them hard. And the second thing is we need to start showing up in proper solidarity with other movements.
Thanks, Sonia, that's great.